And then we have our results kind of still posted, but we want to thank everybody. And our master naturalist, Nina Hauer, will be kind of talking after Chris's presentation this evening, and she'll tell you a little more about the Royal Corona runner bean. So I'm going to stop sharing that. Take that down. Chris, I'm going to have you. And I'm going to go ahead and welcome everyone tonight. My name is Chris Luking, and I serve Bond, Clinton, Jefferson, Marion, and Washington counties. And we're welcoming tonight Chris Enroth, and he's a horticulture educator serving Henderson, Knox, McDonald, and Warren counties. Chris received his bachelor's of plant and soil science, specializing in landscape horticulture from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, and earned his master's of landscape architect at Kansas State University. Chris is responsible for the horticulture programming in Henderson, Knox, McDonald, and Warren counties. And we want to welcome him tonight as he kind of presents about fall gardening and preparing for the next season. Thank you for being with us tonight, Chris.
Well, Chris, thanks for having me tonight. I do appreciate being able to chat with folks about fall. And I don't know if anyone's looked at their calendar yet, but it's August 24th. That means September is really right around the corner. And that means we will be perusing apple orchards while drinking our pumpkin spice lattes before we know it. So tonight, I want to talk to you kind of about a smattering of fall gardening chores, things to get ready for next season. And we're going to be talking about lots of different things here, and it doesn't matter whether you like the flowers or you enjoy the crisp crunch of the fall leaves, the beautiful and delicate textures of cabbage and Swiss chard in the fall and on the dinner plate. There's plenty of work to do, and I think right now is the perfect time to be hanging back inside as we hit highs in the 90s right now this week, and get ready for it to cool off. And fall is definitely my time to be out in the garden and the landscape. I mean, it's getting cooler, of course, for one. Bugs are dying. We have fewer and fewer insects to deal with. And that cool weather makes those veggies taste oh so sweeter. So tonight we're going to talk about composting lawns, veggies, flowers, trees, shrubs, potted plants, and some odds and ends. So let's start with composting first. Now, why do we compost? I'm sure many of you here are gardeners. You know why compost is considered the black gold of the gardening world. But in general, we can add compost, which is organic matter, and it helps us to increase the water holding capacity, which right now, as it's hot and pretty dry in my neck of the woods, at least here in Macomb, I could use some more of that, maybe ease some of my watering chores right now. So again, it acts as kind of that bank in the soil that holds that water for us when we don't get that rainfall. Compost also can help improve our drainage. So if you're like me and you have kind of a heavier clay soil, and that's kind of typical across most of Illinois, except for a couple locations throughout the area, it can help break up some of that heavy clay pan if you might have something like that. It allows some soil nutrients to be included there into the soil, and it just promotes healthy soil overall. When it comes to fertilizers, if we just look at, say, a synthetic or an inorganic, chemically speaking, fertilizer that contains nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, something like compost contains something else, something that our soil microorganisms can take a bite out of, protein, and that helps to build a healthy soil food web. So we have benefits to compost, and is kind of what I'm saying here. Now, how do we add this to our soils here right now? Well, kind of depends of what state your landscaping is. So let's say if you have maybe a more of an open soil type situation, you have a planting bed in a garden, maybe you're going to be installing a new lawn. So the soil's kind of opened up. You can till that in, or you can just top dress that. You can lay that down on top of the soil. We do that quite a bit with our raised beds here in our McDonough County Food Donation Garden that our master gardeners manage here. We at first we tilled things in when we were first building the beds, but we don't have to use the tiller anymore because now we just top dress with some compost and a little bit of topsoil there every single year. It helps to keep our soil because raised beds like to settle over time. That just helps keep the soil levels up a little bit higher, and it provides a little bit of nutrition for those plants. Now, do you compost yourself? If you probably by this time of year, you are accumulating quite the amount of yard waste materials or garden scraps that will be you can save from going into the landfill by composting them yourself. Picture right here is a very fancy compost bin. Mine is not nearly this fancy. I would call this an active compost bin that you actively manage. You monitor the temperature, the soil moisture, make sure there's good oxygen in that compost pile so it cooks really quickly. You get compost and you turn it into bin 2 after a few weeks, and then bin 3 for your finished compost. My composting method is a bit more passive. I would call it, it's a pile in my yard. And I turn it when I feel like it, but most of the time it just sits there. And when I want some compost, I take the more fresher material off the top and I get the rich compost at the bottom of it. Maybe you would like to start a new pile, and fall is a great time to do that because, well, leaves, we are fortunate to live into the part of a world where we have access to a lot of trees, deciduous trees, namely. And these deciduous leaves, they'll fall, and we can shred them up and we can put them in a compost pile. So that adds a lot of carbon there. You could add a nitrogen source, whether it's bagged up lawn clippings or it could just be nitrogen fertilizer in general. And then you can mix that up and you can have delightful piles of compost probably come mid to late next spring. It'll because in the wintertime, when it comes to composting, the colder temperatures tends to slow that process down. So it's going to be working a little bit in the wintertime, but not as it does during the warmer months of the year. But I am a big fan of taking a lot of my shredded up leaves. I have a bagging system on my push mower, and I'll run them over with the mower once, and then that shreds them up. And then a second time, I will bag them up. And what might at first be what appears to be cubic yards, that's plural, cubic yards of leaves, I can shred that down into like maybe a single cubic yard. I can turn that into almost nothing if you go over it a few times. Now, this is a pretty common extension recommendation to not include any plant debris that showed signs of disease during the growing season. And that's definitely still a key recommendation, especially if you're like me and you practice the passive composting. If you have an active system, that means you're monitoring the temperature in the pile. You're making sure that it reaches over 130 degrees for I think it's like 3 to 5 days, and you're turning it. The higher that temperature that gets to that 130 threshold, that helps to kill some weed seeds, some diseases, things like that. Maybe you could add some diseased plant material in there, but I know most homeowners are not monitoring their compost pile that closely. So for the most part, in general, we recommend taking any disease things. So maybe you had a soil-borne wilt in your tomatoes, and who doesn't? I'll say it's pretty common in my neck of the woods. Maybe you've had some anthracnose issues in your shade trees. Again, very common with the spring that we had this year. Take those. You can put them in maybe a yard waste disposal bag. You can bury them, burn them, get them off your property. But regardless, make sure that this is not recycled back into your garden for the next year. Okay, let's talk a little bit about lawns here in the fall, because I bet if you have a vegetable garden, without a doubt, there's probably going to be a lawn somewhere sitting in your yard here. Now, I want to ask this question here. I mean, we go by kind of the farmer's calendar. I'm in rural Illinois. You wake up, it's springtime, time to get to work in the garden and the yard. But when is the best time that we should be working on our lawn? Is it the spring? For me, it's about mid-March to mid-April. Or is it in the fall, about mid-August to mid-September? You're welcome to throw your thoughts in the chat box. Whether spring or fall is the best time to start working on our lawn. But I bet you already have a clue, considering we're talking about fall here. And that's it. Fall. For us, when we're dealing with a cool season lawn, which most Illinoisans have, is the ideal time to do any type of work or renovation on this is about mid-August to mid-September. And that's for me. I'm in central Illinois. If you're in northern Illinois, you're probably looking most of August. If you're in southern Illinois, you're looking most of September. And this is all, of course, very variable when it comes to our weather, but in general, that's about the ideal time to do a lot of this work because we grow cool season lawns for the most part in Illinois. If you have a warm season lawn like zoysia grass or maybe a buffalo grass, which is not very common at all, then you don't need to listen to the rest of this about lawns. So, but for us, cool season lawns, it's Kentucky bluegrass, tall fescue, perennial ryegrass, fine fescue. Our lawns, right now, I can look out my window here and it's dry, they're heat stressed, and they're turning kind of brown, kind of straw brown colored. As it cools off, they begin actively growing again. And they're going to be actively growing until we get our first hard freeze, probably in December. That gives us a big window where we can be doing some overseeding, some fertilizing, some aeration, some work like that. Now, I often, and I say this, I've already talked about leaves, but I'll keep talking about leaves, fall leaves. I feel like they're an underutilized resource in a lot of Illinois gardens. I have utilized our fall shredded leaves for many, many years. For the most part, what I do for most of my yard is I will rake them up, I shred them, and I pile them up in a landscape bed. The pile is about knee to waist deep, depending on how aggressive I am with raking the leaves that year. Right now, I need more leaves. They've already composted and decomposed down into almost nothing. And so, hey, I'm ready for fall again in that landscape bed. I do borrow some of that compost, that soil, that composted organic matter there for other garden projects throughout the year. And so I utilize them throughout my yard, whether I'm in the landscape, whether I'm in the vegetable garden, whether I'm doing containers. Now, another thing that I have been doing, we have moved in the last few years and we have a slightly larger lawn area. I shred my leaves into the lawn. This is becoming more of a common practice as we can start to see more mulching mower type mowers out on the market. There are kits that you can purchase to reconfigure a standard mower into a mulching mower. Is there any basis for this? Well, Michigan State University has shown the benefits to shredding leaves back into the lawn and actually showing that it leads to better weed control. It adds organic matter back to that soil, which again helps out with some of that water holding capacity, might help break up some of that soil compaction. But they have shown in their studies to be beneficial to our lawns to shred them back into there. So there's lots of ways that we can utilize these leaves on our lawns. Don't have to be sending them off to the landfill. And please, please don't be burning them. Just throwing that carbon smoke up into the atmosphere. What are some other things that we can do with our lawn? Well, it's a great time for a soil test. If you are having issues with your lawn, soil tests can help identify potential nutrient issues, possible pH issues, other problems that you might identify in parts of your yard. I would say in the fall, continue to mow as necessary. You've probably heard folks online and maybe even at an extension program say, oh, raise your mowing height, lower your mowing height, do this with your mowing height. I say, leave your mowing height, whatever it is, set it and forget it. For our cool season lawns, the ideal mowing height is between 2 to 3 inches. And I opt for the higher end of that. I set my mowing height to 3 inches and I don't touch it. Doesn't matter if it's the first mowing of the year, last mowing of the year, middle mowing of the year, that's set to 3 inches year round. Now, if you are considering doing some type of fertilizer application, think about how your lawn performs year to year. Does it grow pretty nice and green in the springtime? Well, I often feel that's usually a time when you do not need to be fertilizing in the spring if you have a pretty lush, full, healthy growing lawn in the spring. And most lawns are. They're utilizing a lot of that free nitrogen that has become available after the winter growing season. And, spring's there. They have to do a lot of work on root development, vegetative development, so they can prepare for the hot summer that's ahead of them. Fall is a good time to apply some type of a fertilizer. Now, that's for me, again, it's between mid-August to mid-September. Just apply some type of a fertilizer feeding to give my lawn a little pick-me-up, a little boost after going through a stressful hot summer. Another or a second time that you could apply some type of a fertilizer is a winterizer. This allows the lawn to photosynthesize and store a lot of carbohydrates so that come springtime, they're going to have a little bit extra boost and for that spring green up. Now let's talk about our vegetables. Now, vegetable gardening, I think I grew up doing the traditional gardening, hot, warm season vegetables, sweating, hauling buckets of water to drought, stressed, parched plants. And it's enough to make someone quit gardening altogether. But when I started doing fall gardening, I don't think I want to do any other type of gardening. Can it always be the end of the growing season all times of the year? Not, unfortunately, no. But I really do enjoy fall gardening. Vegetable gardening is one of my favorite times of year to be growing food. Now, what are some to-dos? Some to-dos for the fall garden. If we do practice warm season vegetable gardening, and I still do, I got my tomatoes and peppers and cukes and all that stuff. They're going crazy right now. And I have delicious tomatoes right now. It's wonderful. But as the year winds down and the tomatoes are already starting to show signs of disease, our peppers have a little bit of bacterial spot on them. I'm going to remove and get rid of those diseased plant material. Like I said, I'm a passive composter. I'm not actively managing that pile. So I toss those. Usually we have woods behind our house. They go off in the woods. When I lived in town, they would go in the garbage can. Just diseased plant material. I didn't want it. Any healthy debris goes into the compost pile. Now here you can see this is our food donation garden in Galesburg. These are our volunteers. Look at those big, beautiful, healthy vegetables. But look at the volunteers. They're dressed for cold weather. It's cold that day. They got to get things cleaned up there because a frost was moving in. That garden did not look the same the next day, unfortunately. So we can't do it forever. But so they're cleaning up the garden. They're going to take these cages. They're going to keep them out in the sun in the wintertime to let the UV light break down any possible pathogens and diseases. If you don't do that, you could do something like a bleach, little spray them down or clean them with some soapy water. Get any possible pathogens off of them before you store them away in the wintertime. Now, cool season crops. I hope you have started some cool season crops for this year. Lettuces, spinach, carrots, and absolutely, again, these are my favorite things to grow. When you grow these in the spring, yeah, they do pretty good, but what shows up? Cabbage looper, imported cabbage worm, all kinds of diseases, insects, and then it gets hot. These cool season vegetables don't taste as good in the heat. As things cool down in the fall, the plant produces more sugars to help protect it from the cooler weather, which gives these plants a heightened or a better, I think, flavor. And so start working on your cool season crops. Usually when it comes to seed starting for these, it's about the first week of August. But guess what? I haven't done it, but I'm always behind. And we're going to see a video here in just a second about my crops and how they look even in November, even though I was behind, start getting things started about the first week of September that year. So this is just an example of some of those cool season crops. So picture on the left side of the screen, on kind of the far left are Hikuri turnips, which are the white turnips. I know folks don't like turnips, but these are delicious. They have almost a sweet flavor to them. You roast them with vegetables. Wow, an amazing flavor. We got a couple cool kind of onions that we were trying to overwinter there, but we also have spinach and carrots. On the right side of the screen there, in that right side photo, that's actually a picture inside our cold frame. And a cold frame, if you don't know, is kind of a wedge-shaped structure, just like a wooden box. It's wedge-shaped, and the wedge, or the pointed side, is aimed towards the southern horizon. That, as it gets colder, the sun starts heading towards that horizon more and more. And so we utilize that solar gain or feed, and we use that to help keep this warm during the cooler months of the year. Pictured in the back of the box is, and they're dusted with a BT dust because we were having some cabbage worms that were also enjoying the warmer weather inside there. So a little BT dust right there, which stands for Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a pesticide. So we have bok choy in the back. In the middle, we have bright light Swiss chard. And then forward, a little bit forward, we have kale. And then in the front of that box there, that cold frame, we have, once again, my favorite, Hakuri turnips. I love them. I get requested to bring these every single Thanksgiving. All right. I want to show a video about some of what you can continue to grow. A little bit of work right now, but I'm going to show you a little video about how things look inside a low tunnel, which is basically just a miniature high tunnel. So I'm going to pause my share for a second, and we're going to swap screens. All right, so here we go.
Chris, we still see your slides.
You still see the slides?
Yeah.
It didn't work. Let me try again. I'll just stop sharing for a second. That might be it. Well, how's that?
Now we see it.
Okay. Can you hear the music? That's another question.
Yes.
Okay, very good. I did want to go inside the low tunnel and see what it looks like in there. Let's check it out. So we're here in the low tunnel, and it's actually quite pleasant in here. It's below freezing outside, but in here it's nice and warm. As you can see, we've got row cover here, and there's actually a little bit of ice formed on here. This is our first layer here on the hoops, and then on top of this we put greenhouse polyplastic. And the nice thing about these two layers is that I guess if I take my glove off, I feel that it's nice and warm in here. If I feel the air that's kind of insulating between the plastic and the row cover, it's cooler inside here. And so this creates two barriers, a really good insulative value to a low tunnel. Let's take a look at some of the plants and how they're performing since it's been so cold this kind of late part of November. The kale is looking great. Kale does wonderful even without season extension. One of the crops that I was a little bit concerned about was the Salmonella lettuce, and there is a little bit of frost damage on that. You can see it in the margins have this like black tips to them. That's cold damage on them, but as a whole, the heads of lettuce, they've survived remarkably well. They are harvestable. You know, we could probably pick some right now and make a good salad out of them. The spinach, we've gotten 3 cuts in the spinach, and I think we're gonna get at least one more off of that. The spinach is looking great. The carrots are looking awesome too. Again, we're just holding these throughout the winter. We're going to be harvesting them off and on throughout the winter months here, and we'll have a video about that later. Let's check out some of the other crops down the way here. So had some cabbage left over, and we just let it go. We let it grow, and it's still doing great in here. Actually, I think we're gonna get, we are getting a head of cabbage start to develop here. We have some turnips left over. There's some Swiss chard. We have some bok choy. So all of this is still alive and well, despite the fact that it's been getting down into the low 20s for the last several nights. It's been very windy, and I've actually been very happy that the low tunnel has stayed in place with the winds that we've been having. But otherwise, I'm very pleased with the low tunnel. I had to get it up really quickly, as you saw earlier in the video, but it's done amazingly well. We'll check in at a later date when the weather gets better. Have a good day. Thanks for watching. All right. Well, that was a snapshot in my first year growing in a low tunnel. And now, what is exactly a low tunnel? Well, it's a whole nother class. In talking about season extension. Now that video exists on the Illinois Extension Horticulture YouTube channel. If you want to learn more about growing in the fall and in the winter, I go into how to build a low tunnel. It's pretty simple. It's something that we can all do at home. I go into the different crops and how they did. Some did great, like as you saw the kale, the carrots, spinach. Those did amazing. Eventually, though, that Salanova lettuce that I pointed out that had some cold damage to the leaves, it didn't survive as long as the other more cold hardy crops, and that's fine. That's pretty typical. So if you're interested in that, again, you can find a lot of those videos at Illinois Extension Horticulture YouTube channel. You just go to YouTube and search for Illinois Extension Horticulture. And we're putting up new videos almost weekly, so go check it out. All right, now we talked about cool season crops. What about maybe you've started gardening? I think a lot of people have started gardening in the last couple of years. We always say start small. Don't till up the entire backyard and start gardening. Then you'll never want to do it again. But if you start small, expand slowly year to year as you get more familiarity with growing crops and the issues and problems that are always going to be popping up. It will allow you to expand your crops and expand your diet and what you're able to grow and eat. A lot of times, fall is a great time to build a raised bed. And that way, it is ready for you when you start gardening in the spring. Raised beds also tend to warm up a little bit quicker than the soil, the ground, because it's elevated. And so it has a little bit more solar exposure during the spring. And so it tends to warm up. You usually are able to grow in there a little bit faster than you are if you're growing straight in the ground. And I would say for the most part, a lot of our residential developments, typically what they do is they strip the topsoil away and then they sell it, which leaves us with crummy subsoil. So a lot of, especially kind of from like the 70s on, the soil there is not that great. And so I tell folks, well, if your soil isn't great, if it's pretty lousy clay subsoil, avoid it altogether and grow in raised beds. And there's lots of different materials that you can use to build these raised beds. There are plans out the wazoo. If you go online and look them up, these are just a couple examples, whether it's timber or just found logs. I think those are actually ash trees that they use to frame that raised bed right there. And I know in my neck of the woods, we have a lot of ash trees that are dying right now. There are little kits that you can purchase and put together, or you can just stack some stone around and build your beds like that. Now, what do you fill them with? This can go a little bit back and forth, but for the most part, what we can fill with, if you are gardening in a raised bed because you have lousy soil to begin with, I wouldn't take that soil and pile it in there. Typically though, like a mix 50-50 topsoil to compost ratio, that's pretty good. Now the topsoil, that's actual soil, that's physical mineral soil. That's what creates the structure for your raised beds. The compost, that's organic matter, and your raised bed will settle routinely every year. And a lot of that is because the compost is just being used up, and it's leaching down. It's used by the plants. It's going up in the atmosphere. There's lots of things utilizing that organic matter, or it escapes. And so your beds will settle. Just keep that in mind. Top dressing it with more topsoil. We've utilized cover crops in our beds to help use those almost year-long root systems to help build up a better soil structure in our raised beds. And fall is the time to plant the garlic. So I hope you have your garlic ordered, because I was looking, oh my goodness, was it at the beginning of August? And there are already places that are sold out of garlic, and that was the beginning of August. I haven't looked recently. So there are shortages with everything these days, and garlic is definitely one of them. So in the fall, typically where I'm at in Macomb, we plant our garlic about the first week of November. Now that's a little late, I understand that, but it has worked for us every single year. It's had the ideal day. We've had the volunteer labor, and it's worked out every single year for us, that first week of November. Some folks like to plant it the first week of October. That's probably, if you're up more in northern Illinois, farther down in southern Illinois, the first week of November probably is not an issue for you. Pictured here is that's actually us. We were doing a little research project with cover crops and garlic right here. We were actually cutting furrows here with a soil ripper to plant our garlic cloves in here. So planted them 6 inches deep. I think it was, a couple inches apart. And then that next year, that's what we pulled out of the ground right there. So beautiful. These are hardneck garlic types. I think the variety specifically there is called Music. Absolutely wonderful. I have garlic in my garage that this project was done in 2014. I have saved garlic year after year from this project that I still have right now curing in my garage. Some of it will be planted out this fall, but a lot of it will also go into some winter cuisine. All right, let's talk about our planting beds. Now, when it comes to landscape beds, some to-dos on our honey-do list here, I'd say cut back any perennials that don't add much winter interest. I think, though, a lot of our perennials, a lot of our annuals even, they add quite a bit of winter interest. So pictured here a coneflower with the snow on them, or we have our red twig dogwood. There might be things that we would prune out, maybe dead foliage, disease stuff. But for the most part, I leave most of my stems, whether it's flower stalks or leaves, standing. I don't care if it's a hosta or if it's a black-eyed Susan. There are insects that will overwinter inside those stems, and so they can be beneficial if you are more of a ecologically minded type gardener. Otherwise, though, throw these used up plant parts into the compost pile, and you can compost them. Spring blooming bulbs. Last year, I remember, speaking of plant shortages and bulbs specifically, trying to order certain bulbs out of the bulb catalogs, and they were out. I didn't get any spring bulbs planted last year because I didn't act fast enough. So make sure that you have, I don't think I've even gotten a bulb catalog though yet. So maybe I'm still too early, but I'm telling you, it feels like fall is just around the corner. But get those spring bulbs in the ground, and you might have issues with critters digging them up, squirrels, something like that. Tulips are absolutely delicious. Some mammals out there. What are some solutions? Well, there's not any really foolproof things. The most probably effective control measure is physical exclusion. Now there are some repellents and things that you can spray, and because these are not edible crops, that opens up a couple more products that you can use in terms of repellents. Also, make sure that wherever you're planting those, you clean up a lot of the debris, any of the paper or anything like that that's left over that falls off the bulbs. Clean that up, because that leaves a scent for the animals to find where they're at. You can see on that picture there on the right side of the screen, they're putting that chicken wire, chicken fencing over top where they planted their bulbs to keep the animals, whether it's a squirrel, even sometimes the dog, they see fresh dug soil and they're like, ooh, what was that? They dig in there. So you can protect them from some mammals. Physical exclusion is really probably the best way to go in terms of its effectiveness. There are some repellents that might work, but it's kind of a crapshoot. If an animal is hungry enough, they're going to go after something and they'll try to get to it. Add fresh mulch onto our flower bed. Now, this is something I actually did just this last weekend. We got an order of mulch and we top dressed a lot of our beds. Now, I prefer to use like a more larger wood chip type mulch, like just chipped up trees. Those work for me. It's hard in my neck of the woods, since we're a bit more rural, to get deliveries from a tree care company or electrical company. And so, but this year, we've over the years have had to use like shredded mulch. Now, shredded mulch over time, actually, the fibers will knit together and form this shell. So before I top dressed this year, I just took a 3-prong cultivator and I just broke that shell up and kind of turned it a little bit to make sure that I didn't create like stratified layers of mulch over time. And I just freshened it up with a nice layer of mulch. And when I'm just top dressing, not necessary to apply like, lots of mulch. I'm just top dressing to give it a kind of an updated look, and just kind of make it look a little bit more ready for next year. If you're starting a new landscape bed, which we also utilize some of our mulch for that, I added it on pretty thickly. I mean, I would say I did not skimp on some of our new planting beds that we created this year, just last weekend, actually. So I would say 6 inches plus thick mulch, like 6 inches or more deep, because I really want to kill that grass. I didn't bother spraying anything. I didn't lay anything down to kill it beforehand. I just applied the mulch very thick, and hopefully by next spring, some of that will have settled, some of it will have decomposed, and I will start planting in there, utilizing probably starting with my structural layer, the shrubs, small trees, and then perennials year after that. Left side of the screen is actually shredded up leaves. Another industry term for that is leaf mold. So leaf mold mulch is another really great thing that you can spread around your plants. When I worked at Missouri Botanical Garden, that was our mulch of choice. It really helps to build a delightful soil and insulate it at the same time. Well, I'm not really a rose person. I do have a couple roses in my yard, but they're sort of on their own. But I know some of you rosarians out there really pay attention to your roses. So the question is often, when do I cover my roses in the fall? And really, we want to wait until the ground has frozen. And so that allows the time for your rose to experience those freezing and those cold temperatures to then go into dormancy. Because if you cover them too soon, it might artificially keep it warm. It might not enter dormancy sooner than the rest of the area around it. Now, for the most part, you can mound up some very loose, large material like leaves, coarse wood chips, things like that around the base. And that protects the base. So if you're in a very exposed area and you routinely get rose dieback in the winter, sometimes some winters we even have complete death of the plant, you might want to be protecting just the base of that plant. As you can see in that diagram there on the bottom half of the screen, where it's a little like they put soil, they put leaves, evergreen branches, and that's really just in an effort to protect that base of that plant and the roots of that plant over the winter months. They make things like rose cones, stuff like that you can place over the roses. Like I said, this is well beyond what I do for my roses. My roses are really on their own in the winter, and I'll knock them back to the ground if I have to. But I haven't lost them completely. But there have been winters, and I have experienced other homeowners, clients, things like that have seen complete rose death, especially during those polar vortexes. Now let's hit on our trees and shrubs because, as I said, things are cooling off, makes us want to do a lot more yard work. but we do not want to start pruning our trees and shrubs once you start seeing that fall color change and they are preparing for dormancy. We do not want to be getting these things out and start hacking away at them. By pruning them, we trigger a growth response that can delay dormancy. And so we want to wait until the plants have dropped all their leaves and are completely dormant for the winter months. And I love pruning my trees and shrubs in the winter because I can see the structure of the plant and it allows me to make, I think, more thoughtful pruning cuts. I think a lot of folks have planted trees this year, and we have to make sure that we are watering them, especially right now. I mean, right now it is hot, it is dry. Our plants need water right now. If this dry weather continues into the fall, we definitely need to be making sure that we water our plants, because as it gets cold and our soils freeze, that locks up the water or the soil moisture. It's just like a drought for our plants. So we have to make sure they go into the winter flush with water, plenty of soil moisture availability at that for the right now throughout the fall months. Now, fall usually brings more reliable rainfall, but not all the time. We had a pretty dry autumn. Was it last year or the year before? The farmers were able to get out and do all their harvesting with almost record time. It was dry. And so make sure that we're getting out there and watering our evergreens. So pictured here are some newly planted evergreens, making sure that you're getting those watered right now and into the fall months. Putting up, here's a rhododendron with kind of a wind screen or a baffle that protects it from that desiccating winter winds. And then, of course, any newly planted trees, I would say planted this year, even the year before, making sure they are getting into the winter months with adequate soil moisture. Now, a lot of us when we plant newly planted trees, the newly planted or the younger trees tend to have thinner bark. That's just the nature of the trees. They're not as old. They haven't had the time to mature and develop that thicker bark. So what happens, and this is especially notorious on maples, is what's called southwest injury or southwest disease. And so pictured on the left side of the screen is actually a red maple trunk. And this injury occurs very, very commonly on the southwest side of that tree. Basically, the tree warms up in the winter months by the summer sun, warms up those cells, gets some of that water moving around. That sun goes down, goes behind a cloud, whatever. Sharp change in temperature, and those tissues split, crack open, and that damages that side of the tree. We can help prevent this by just wrapping that tree with some like basic tree wrap as pictured on the right side of the screen, and making sure to remove that tree wrap in the spring. And then critters, they're going to be hungry in the winter months. So pictured here are actually some fruit trees. Now, a lot of this protection is to keep the animals off from the developing fruit, but it also helps to avoid damage, say from rubbing deer in the winter months. Animals and squirrels, things like that might want to peel off bark for nesting material. And those poor blueberries they're just in prison, from either birds for the fruit, deer for the browsing, it's just other damage in general from four-legged animals. Now, we want to cover houseplants real quick. I say as we begin getting cooler temperatures, we're moving plants inside. Should we be repotting? I'd say it's optional. I prefer to repot my houseplants in the spring. Usually freshen them up with new potting soil, maybe a slow release fertilizer, and send them on their way outside. And then I do check the foliage very carefully for insects, because outside there's a lot of natural predators to keep those pest insects in check. Inside, well, we probably don't have those. So making sure that I don't bring the pests in with the plants. I do this by sharp streams of water. I spray off the leaves try to clean them off as best I can, and get rid of any, say, spider mites, whitefly, aphids, anything like that. I don't want to bring those inside. I remove anything that's damaged. I remove that before I take it inside. As the days get shorter, our plants know this, they sense this, and so their processes slow down. If we fertilize them, that can trigger a growth response, and so they'll put out all this energy to grow, only to be met with short dark days, and they can't recoup that energy loss. So I don't fertilize. I don't do any of that in the fall. Because they slow down, they don't use as much water. So water sparingly. And it never fails. When I move my plants inside, I just cannot equate the amount of sunlight that they get out on the back patio. They're going to shed leaves because they're not getting as much light. It's normal. Don't panic. You just got to get the vacuum out more often. I also enjoy perennializing my annuals. And so I take cuttings from my coleus every year. I've kept some coleus going for several years now. I even have some pepper plants that I have perennialized, and I move them in and out. I think my longest that I've kept a pepper plant alive is 3 years. And so, I perennialize some things. So pictured here is taking cuttings from coleus, putting those in some solo cups, and I put them under grow lights in the basement. Just some miscellaneous things, just some odds and ends out there. If you have an irrigation system, in our vegetable garden here, we do have one. It's a drip irrigation system. Make sure that you clean that out. We use gravity to assist most of our water from draining out. But what happens when it freezes? It expands. And especially rigid plastic and metal pipes, those run the risk of bursting. If you have an in-ground irrigation system for your landscape or yard, usually professionals will come out, or commercial, you'll be contract with them and they'll blow out the irrigation system, or maybe you can do that yourself. And so making sure we get all the water out of there so we don't get damaged long-term. My mom loved having fountains out in the garden. And so we always had fountains that we had to make sure that we would winterize. We don't want our pumps to freeze. We don't want water necessarily to freeze in some of these water fountains, because that will make them again crack. So making sure that we're just winterizing these fountains, because I was actually at the garden center the other day and my son was infatuated with all of the garden fountains. So I looked at a couple price tags. Those are not things that you want to break because you forgot to clean them and winterize them in the fall. And then clean pots and planters. And, as the days slow down in the fall, this is a great time to do this. Scrubbing, washing any plastic pots, clay pots, ceramic, whatever you use. And one trick to keep your pots from sticking together is slipping a little piece of newspaper, as you can see right there. That helps to keep them from sticking together, makes it easier for you to break them apart. And then as you're sitting there watching the maybe the Macy's Day Parade or whatever your fall entertainment is, handing out candy at Halloween, you can start cleaning and sharpening, oiling those garden tools. And lots of different methods for that. Depends on the tool itself, whether you're using tool steel, steel itself, wood, lots of different ways to go about maintaining our garden tools so that they can last us and maybe even our next generation. Because I know I'm currently using my grandfather's shovel in the yard, so we can make them last for a long time. Now, with that, happy to take questions. Let me open up the chat box here real quick. Let's see.
Okay, Chris, there's a couple that have come in and we'll kind of get you started. When clearing up garden areas, they say leave the leaves. But what if you suspect infestation of army or cutworms? Won't they be there to munch on the new crop?
Yep. And so that would be one reason I would say, if you've had issues with armyworm, cutworm, insects that are going to be overwintering in that debris, definitely get that out of there and remove it from the garden. So yeah, I would say if it has been something that has plagued you this year, and I've seen more issues this year with cutworm, things like that have plagued vegetable gardens this year. So I don't know if it was just a good year for them or what, but definitely has been more of an issue. So yeah, if that's you, get those debris out of there. Yeah.
Another question was, what kinds of cover crops do you use in raised beds?
Oh, as easy as I can make it on myself. I actually right now would be a great time. So I have an oats, radish, and oats, radish. Is it behind me? It's not behind me. It's out in the garden shed. Oats, radish, and I think it's like a annual wheat, something like that. But the key is they winter kill. So I would throw the seed down underneath the tomatoes, underneath the peppers and cucumbers right now. Get those to germinate. By the time the frost hits the plants, the cover crop is germinated, starts growing. Those are fairly cold hardy crops. They're going to survive until we get our first couple hard freezes, and then they're going to die. And I don't have to worry about it after that. You can use cover crops that you plant in the spring months, but usually you have to terminate those yourself with a tiller or glyphosate or some other means to kill that plant so that it doesn't produce seed. Because one of the issues with cover crops is once they flower and if they produce seed, they can become nightmares. Buckwheat is an amazing cover crop, but if you let that go to seed, you will hate that plant. So I prefer any cover crop that I can plant in the fall and that will winter kill, and I don't have to put much effort into it.
Okay, great. Thank you. And that's some good suggestions. Another one that came in was to plant crocus in your lawn in a well-drained location.
Definitely. The indicator that spring has arrived is when the crocus pops up in my lawn.
Another question was, do you need to use some kind of insecticidal soap on plants if you're bringing them in for the winter, or is water sufficient?
I have never used insecticidal soaps when bringing them in. I have used insecticidal soaps in the middle of winter when the pest population tends to explode. I have had grasshoppers' eggs that they lay their eggs in the soil, have hatched, and have gone to town on all of my plants because, well, there's really nothing else for them to eat. And so that's like a time, actually, I had to deploy something a little bit stronger than the soaps. And so, yeah, insecticidal soaps can be used. Be careful. Make sure you're always reading the label with these things, because soaps, the way they work is they work via suffocation of the insect. Your plant also does breathe. And so I have seen many times folks have applied soaps or oils to their plants and thinking, well, a little's good, a lot must be better, and have actually coated and suffocated their plants. So just be careful. Read those labels, follow those rates that are recommended.
Okay, thank you. And I have one more. Are there any recommendations for vine borer control for fall?
Oh, so squash vine borer, my goodness. Yeah, our zucchini got hit this year. So we lost probably 3/4 of our zucchini plants. Now, right now, the moth, it's a clear-winged moth. She lays her eggs at the base of the squash plant. She's not flying anymore. She's done for the year. So earlier, so I would say when we started noticing the damage, late July, we planted fresh zucchini in a different part of the garden, and that right now is starting to grow, starting to flower, and we're going to have zucchini probably up around middle of September here, and we're going to get we're going to get a second crop. And so you can stagger out your planting dates. So again, that female clearing moth, she is not going to be flying all summer long. And so early zucchini, middle zucchini crop, and late season zucchini crop is one way to go about it. Otherwise, it's monitoring, spraying some type of an insecticide with typically the active ingredient, something like carbaryl, which they've changed their active ingredient, which that's a 7 product, zeta cypermethrin, something like that. But targeted applications at the base of the plant. You can use a needle or a paper clip to fish out the caterpillar inside of that vine, and you can mound up soil and fingers crossed that it will form adventitious roots and reroot.
Okay, thank you so much for all these. What we'd like to do now is to introduce Nina Howard, and we're going to let her share her screen, and she's going to talk about inner planting, and then we'll kind of come back to any further questions that you have either for Nina or for Chris. Is that okay? Good with you, Chris?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Nina Howard, And Chris surprised me this morning, asked me to talk a little bit about this presentation that she's put together. If you advance the screen, please. What you're seeing on the screen, one of the other.
Wait a minute, she hasn't shared the screen yet. Okay, so go back. Wait, 1 second, we're gonna go ahead and share the screen. So you need to go to share screen. Go there. And then we go to the beginning of the presentation. So you have to go to the beginning. Yep, there you go. And then you want to go all the way to the top. Okay. Start from the beginning. There, that one. Yep. There you go.
Okay, now if you'll advance the screen, one more, please. My technician is off to the left. Okay, back to this. One of the garden members overplanted okra, so she needed to thin it out. And I suggested that we try something that we'd never tried before, which was to interplant in between the rows of okra with a fall crop. Now, yes, today is probably one of the hottest days of the year so far, and we planted spinach, but we're going to give it a try. What we did was in between the rows of okra, we laid out a little bit of a grid and set down seeds of several kinds of spinach in between the rows of okra in anticipation that the okra is going to get big and shade that spinach from the sun. This interplanting is called, what have you called it? Interplanting, yes, okay. The point is that we're trying to utilize the okra, which is going to get several more feet taller than what you see there, and will help shade out the spinach from the really hot sun. So as I said, we used the hoe and made neat little rows in between all of the okra plants and planted. The package called for a ½ inch deep and covered that with soil and then gently watered it in. And so that we know what's coming up and it's not weeds, we actually marked it. Cute little packages. And what this is called is interplanting. It can serve, as Chris said, as a cover crop. We're hoping to be able to eat it instead of incorporating it back into the soil. Never done this before, so we are experimenting to see if this is actually going to work. In the past, in the last couple of years, we've had success by planting spinach in the fall. And once it gets about 3 inches tall, just prior to the first hard frost, we'll cover it with straw. And we've been able to not only overwinter it, but we've got really early spring spinach. And now this is a new experiment we're going to try. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nina. And Chris, is there any further questions for Chris or Nina tonight? I don't see more in the chat box. Do you have, I'm sorry, there's one more. I guess we answered that one. Chris, does anybody have any further questions for Chris or Nina tonight? Anything that you need answered for our fall session on fall gardening? If not, Chris, are you still there with us?
I am still here, yes.
All right.
That's a really cool experiment too, interplanting the okra with the spinach. So I'm Yes,
I know,
excited
isn't
to
that kind of cool?
see how
So
it
this will be
goes.
kind of fun. It was really warm today. I think I got up to what, 96 degrees when I checked outside
Mhm.
today. So whenever you can think about fall crops and everything, it said that I think it will be harvested in 45 days. Again, it might vary a little bit with the temperatures and germination and everything, but it's still a great thing to look forward to later in the fall. So have a nice harvest again. I see everybody just telling you thank you very much, Chris. So we appreciate you joining us this evening. And Nina, we appreciate you kind of coming out and helping us out tonight, kind of giving us some new pointers and maybe a new tip to try for a fall gardening. I don't see any other questions. If not, we thank you again for joining us, and thank you, Chris, for everything, helping us out, talking about how we can improve our fall and what we can do to kind of compost and get everything started. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.
Stop.